The storm hit without warning. One minute the forest was still a postcard of late summer calm, and the next the wind began to howl through the trees like a voice from some ancient depth. Rain poured down in sheets so thick it erased the trail and turned the dirt path into a vein of moving brown water. This was Mount Talos Reserve in Oregon, a place known for sudden weather and sharp cliffs, a place you didn't wander into without gear a map and a plan. But in 1987, the Reynolds family had all of those. They were experienced campers. Dean Reynolds was a schoolteacher, meticulous and prepared, and Alice Reynolds had grown up in Oregon's backwoods. Their twin boys, Thomas and Leo, were only 6, but already knew how to pitch a tent and hang food bags in trees to keep the bears away. That weekend, they had planned a 2-night stay in the South Pines Basin area, a secluded spot that Dean had circled months ago when planning the trip. What was supposed to be a bonding getaway became one of the most baffling missing persons cases in state history. When the ranger station failed to hear their check-in by Monday morning, a search party was dispatched. The family's truck was located near the trailhead, locked and untouched, a lunch still resting on the dash wrapped in wax paper, as if someone had intended to eat it just after a short hike. The search went on for days, then weeks. Helicopters sent dogs. Volunteers, even a psychic was brought in at the insistence of a distant cousin. Nothing, not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, not a single footprint remained. The tent was gone too, not collapsed or shredded. Gone, as if someone had carefully removed it and packed it away, erasing any sign the family had even been there. In the absence of evidence, theories bloomed. Some suspected foul play. Others guessed they had fallen into one of the dozens of sinkholes or crevices that dotted the cliffs. But there were problems with each theory. Why would all 4 vanish without a trace at once? Why no signs of struggle, no signs of weather damage, no remains washed downstream? Time passed. The Reynolds family was quietly folded into Oregon's long list of unsolved disappearances. 12 years later, in 1999, a forestry student named Jordan Peters was surveying trees affected by bark beetle infestations near the edge of South Pines Basin. It was late September, and most of the tourists were gone, leaving only the wind and rustling trees. Jordan was mapping the ridgeline when he tripped over what he thought was a root and landed hard on something soft but firm. Brushing away leaves and dirt, he uncovered a green canvas corner poking from beneath years of pine debris. His first thought was that it was old gear left by careless campers. But as he cleared more of the debris, he revealed a full tent collapsed but intact, hidden like a shipwreck in the woods. He radioed his supervisor. Within hours, park rangers arrived. What they found inside turned the forgotten Reynolds case into national news again. Inside the tent were several sealed plastic containers with dry food dated to 1987, a small notebook, a Polaroid camera, and one damp but mostly intact camping map with red pen markings. What chilled the rangers was the discovery of 2 small pairs of shoes placed side by side as if someone had told the children to take them off before lying down. The air inside the tent smelled of mildew and old pine. The map had trails drawn on it that didn't match current ones. Some of the markings pointed toward a narrow ravine marked with the word "alone." Near the bottom corner, in what looked like a child's handwriting, were the words "not alone." DNA testing confirmed the shoes belonged to the Reynolds twins. Soil analysis showed the tent had not been moved recently. It had been there for years. But how had it evaded multiple search teams? Why had the canvas not degraded? Why was the tent buried beneath layers of foliage that should have accumulated over at least a decade? Investigators returned to the site with fresh eyes and better equipment. They found little else. No bodies, no gear scattered around. Just that tent like a ghost rising from the past. News vans arrived. Journalists dug up old footage. Theories returned like old wounds reopened. A retired ranger who had led the original 1987 search team told the reporter that area had been swept 3 times. It wasn't there. I'd bet my life on it. Alice Reynolds' brother, now in his 60s, returned to the forest for the first time since the disappearance. He stood near the unearthed tent for nearly an hour without speaking, just staring. When asked what he felt, he said, "It's not grief anymore, it's something else. It's like they never left. Investigators tried to trace the camera's origin and found a single undeveloped Polaroid inside. When developed, it showed the two boys. They looked older than 6, more like 8 or 9. Behind them, partially obscured by a tree, was a shadowy figure with what seemed like long gray hair and arms too long for a normal person. The photo was grainy. Some said it was a trick of the light. Others were not so sure. The case was reopened. Locals shared stories that had long been whispered over drinks in dim bars. About singing heard deep in the forest at night. About a woman who lived among the trees with a face no one remembered. Most were dismissed. But one man, a botanist named Ellis Crane, shared something that made even the seasoned detectives pause. He had been mapping the flora around the basin back in 1987 and remembered something strange. A patch of forest where the plants grew twisted, leaves curled backward, vines that spiraled counterclockwise as if trying to dig into the earth rather than climb upward. He had noted the coordinates but never returned. It was by strange coincidence near the spot where the tent was found. The story no longer belonged to just one family. It belonged to the forest now, to whatever had hidden that tent from the world, to the mystery that the storm had swallowed whole. And what it left behind 12 years later was just the beginning. Ellis Crane had not set foot in South Pines Basin in over a decade, but something about the recent discovery pulled at him like a hook beneath the ribs. He returned alone with a single backpack and a field journal. The forest was thicker now than he remembered, more overgrown and darker. The wind carried a damp chill, and the air smelled faintly of iron. He followed the old coordinates he had recorded in his journal back in 1987, moving past moss-covered boulders and blackened tree stumps. The trail had all but vanished, and at several points he had to crouch under fallen branches or wade through thickets that clawed at his sleeves. Eventually, he reached the glade he had described all those years ago. The same sickly, twisting vines curled along the trees, and the ground seemed to sag under his feet as if it resented being walked upon. Ellis knelt and placed a hand on the soil. It felt warm. Too warm for early October, and not in a way that made sense. He opened his notebook and began sketching the vines, but stopped when he noticed something odd. The roots beneath one tree were knotted in such a way that they resembled writing. He stared, trying to decipher what he was seeing. The shape was not a word he recognized, but it repeated itself several times across different trees. Always the same curve and hook, the same unnatural symmetry. Back at the ranger station, Ellis shared his sketches with the lead investigator on the Reynolds case. The man was skeptical at first, but something in Ellis's voice made him pause. They contacted a linguistic anthropologist from the University of Oregon who specialized in Native American petroglyphs. The symbols did not match any known language, but the professor noted that certain tribal myths from the area spoke of spirits who hid in the roots of trees and whispered through the wind. They were not malevolent exactly, but they were not kind either. They were watchers, guardians perhaps, or prisoners. The myths varied. What they all agreed on was that these entities could bend time in ways that made people forget what had happened. Some who encountered them returned changed. Others never returned at all. The team returned to the glade with ground-penetrating radar. What they found buried beneath 3 feet of soil was a wooden structure. It was rectangular and appeared to be a box or a chamber. They excavated it slowly, careful not to damage the contents. The wood was old, but preserved unnaturally well, as if time had passed differently underground. Inside, they found objects that should not have been there. A child's drawing of a forest with red figures among the trees. A rusted harmonica with the initials TR carved into one side. A baby tooth wrapped in linen. Most disturbing of all was a cloth doll with button eyes and a torn mouth that had been sewn shut with red thread. Forensics dated the items to the late 1980s. Public interest surged again. Conspiracy forums lit up with theories. Some blamed a government cover-up. Others pointed to ancient curses or forest spirits. One user who claimed to be a former ranger posted a blurry photograph of what he said was the same glade in 1989. In the photo, a figure could be seen in the distance, pale and featureless, standing between two trees. The figure's proportions were off. The arms were too long, and the legs seemed to taper into the ground. Most dismissed it as a hoax, but a few noted that the coordinates matched Ellis's location exactly. The authorities cordoned off the area and declared it restricted for ecological research. Officially, nothing else was found. Unofficially, 2 members of the excavation team stopped speaking altogether. One disappeared entirely. His belongings were left in his cabin untouched. His boots sat neatly by the door. His phone was still charging on the kitchen counter. The only thing missing was the man himself. His name was Owen Price, and he had been one of the first to descend into the chamber. His wife claimed he had become obsessed with something he saw down there. He kept sketching trees with eyes and said the forest was watching them back. Weeks later, another discovery was made. A local hiker named Daniela found a trail camera wedged between 2 rocks near the ridge above the basin. It was not park property. The camera was old and the memory card damaged, but a few images were salvageable. Most showed trees wind deer, but one frame captured something else. 2 children standing side by side. They were barefoot and wearing what looked like handmade clothes. Their faces were obscured by motion blur, but their posture was unmistakably familiar. A forensic image analyst compared the silhouettes to photos of the Reynolds twins. The match was not definitive, but it was close enough to reignite the investigation. A new search was authorized, focusing on the upper ridges and surrounding glens. Drones were deployed and dozens of officers combed the area. After 4 days, they located a small clearing previously missed due to thick overhead canopy. There, they found evidence of recent habitation. Stones arranged in a circle. Ashes from a fire. Footprints, a crude shelter made from branches and bark. Tied to a tree was a strip of cloth with the same red thread as the doll from the chamber. No people were found, no voices. But a tape recorder was discovered hidden under a pile of leaves. The tape was brought to a lab for restoration. What it contained was 40 minutes of ambient forest sounds followed by a faint melody. It was a lullaby, the same one mentioned in the original ranger reports from 1987. Several of the volunteers involved in the early search had spoken of hearing music at night, but it had been dismissed as stress or imagination. Now it played clearly. A woman's voice, soft and slow, humming a tune that no one could place but that felt oddly familiar. The last 10 seconds of the tape contained whispering. The words were not in English and not in any recognized language. Linguists speculated it was a constructed dialect or perhaps reversed audio. When reversed, the whispering resolved into a single sentence repeated twice. They were never lost. They were chosen. The question shifted from where the Reynolds family had gone to who or what had kept them there, and whether they were still watching. Ellis Crane returned to the forest alone once again despite the warnings. He had spent weeks reviewing the tape and studying the plants from the glade. The vines he collected had continued to grow even after being removed from the soil. Their tendrils reached toward light in erratic movements that did not follow any known botanical pattern. His apartment began to smell of wet earth and iron. His colleagues at the university expressed concern when he began sketching the root symbols on his walls. He told them he had to go back. He had to know if the forest was still hiding something deeper. Before leaving, he left a voicemail for the lead investigator. He said, "There is something underneath the glade, and I believe I saw movement below the soil." That message was the last anyone heard from him. A search party was sent to the basin 2 days later. They found Ellis's pack near the same twisted tree line. His field journal lay open beside it, the final entry written in hurried strokes. It read, "I heard the boys. They were laughing. I think they are still here." The rest of the pages were smeared with mud and indecipherable. A fresh trail led from the pack into the dense brush, but ended abruptly less than 20 feet in. There were no further prints and no sign of struggle. Dogs brought to the scene refused to move beyond the glade. They whined and pulled away as if something invisible blocked their path. Back in town, the authorities attempted to downplay the disappearance. They called it a tragic accident and discouraged further visits to South Pines Basin. But word had already spread. Journalists and curiosity seekers began arriving in increasing numbers. A local paper published a detailed timeline of the Reynolds case, including the recent findings. One article interviewed a woman named Grace Dalrymple who claimed her brother had vanished in the basin back in 1962. She described a nearly identical situation: a sudden storm, an abandoned camp, a missing person with no sign of escape. She recalled being a child and hearing voices in the woods calling her name, even though no one else was around. Her family moved away shortly after the search ended. She had not returned since, but reading about the glade made old memories come back in painful clarity. The authorities began losing control of the narrative. Online forums organized amateur expeditions. Podcasts covered the story in multi-part episodes. A documentary crew secured permits to film in the reserve. Among them was a man named Jack Mercer, who had worked in wilderness survival for over 20 years. He was skeptical at first, but the story intrigued him. His younger brother had also gone missing while hiking in a nearby region in the late 70s. Jack joined the team not out of curiosity, but out of obligation. He wanted to see if there was a pattern. The film crew arrived in early spring. The forest was waking from winter with shoots of green pressing through damp earth. They set up base just outside the restricted zone. Jack led the team into the woods with a GPS unit and compass. The others carried cameras, sound equipment, and notebooks. They planned to stay 5 days. The first 2 were uneventful. They recorded interviews and background shots. On the 3rd day, Jack wandered off trail to follow an animal path. He did not return that night. The crew searched for hours and finally called emergency services. Jack was found the next morning near the river mouth. He was soaking wet and barefoot with scratches along his arms and legs. His pupils were dilated and he spoke in fragments. He said, "I walked into the trees and then the trees walked into me." He said, "I saw a man whose mouth opened sideways and the sound came from his eyes." He said, "They said I could stay, but only if I forget." The medics sedated him for safety. When he awoke later, he claimed not to remember anything after leaving camp. He could not explain the scratches or why his boots were missing. The footage recovered from his body camera showed him walking into the brush and then 10 minutes of black screen. The audio file was corrupted except for a brief section where a melody similar to the earlier tape could be heard. But this time, the voice hummed slower and deeper. The last few seconds captured Jack whispering something. The voice was soft but clear. It said, "I see the glade now. It is not what it was." The team cut the trip short. Most refused to speak about the incident afterward. One crew member posted anonymously on a forum saying they felt watched every night and that the forest seemed to rearrange itself when no one was looking. The man deleted the post 2 days later and removed his account. Meanwhile, the ranger station received an envelope with no return address. Inside were 3 Polaroids. Each showed a different scene within the forest. The first depicted a ring of stones surrounded by mushrooms. The second showed a boy with red hair standing behind a tree looking directly into the lens. The third was darker, but appeared to show a face half covered in moss. Forensics dated the film to the 1980s. The boy resembled Thomas Reynolds. But it was the third photo that troubled investigators most. The moss-covered face had human features, but its skin was bark-like, and one eye was open, showing a pupil that was far too large. They showed the photos to Alice Reynolds' brother. He stared at the boy's image for several minutes and then said quietly, "That is him. That is Thomas." Efforts were renewed. A private search organization offered support. The state allocated more funds for controlled exploration of South Pines Basin. But strange interference plagued every attempt. Equipment failed. Maps changed subtly between visits. Radios picked up static that sounded almost like a voice, but no one could isolate the words. One volunteer vanished overnight. Another broke down and said she had heard her own name spoken in her dead mother's voice. She was hospitalized for acute stress and later refused to return to the forest. The pattern was becoming undeniable. The forest was not just hiding something, it was choosing what to reveal and when. The discovery of the photographs ignited a deeper obsession in those already captivated by the Reynolds mystery. But it was not until a retired forest worker named Harold Minks came forward that investigators began to piece together a chilling new timeline. Harold had worked for the Department of Forestry in the late 1980s. He had been part of a small team assigned to maintain fire breaks and trails in South Pines Basin. After seeing the boy in the photograph, he retrieved an old storage box from his attic. It contained journals and maps from his years on the job. Inside was a leather-bound notebook with the initials DR on the front cover, Dean Reynolds. Harold claimed he had found the notebook in 1991, wedged inside a hollow tree during a solo patrol. He had not reported it because he believed it was unrelated to the disappearance and he feared it might implicate him in trespassing beyond his authorized zone. The notebook had since sat untouched for almost a decade. The pages were weathered but legible. Investigators carefully photographed and analyzed every entry. The writing began like a typical camping journal. Dean described the hike, the terrain, and the weather. He noted the children's excitement and Alice's laughter. Then something changed. Around the third entry, Dean began to describe a sound. It came at night, soft and distant like a woman humming. He assumed it was a bird at first, or the wind brushing through the pine needles. But it returned each evening, always the same melody, always the same rhythm. Alice heard it too. She described it as familiar, but could not place the tune. The boys said nothing at first, but Dean noticed they started waking up more often and would stare at the tent ceiling in silence. One night, Leo said someone was whispering outside. Dean searched the area with a flashlight but saw nothing. He noted in the journal that he felt watched. The feeling persisted during the day. By the fifth entry, Dean wrote that the trail markers had changed. They no longer matched his map. Alice argued that they were going in circles. The children complained of dizziness, and Leo mentioned a tall woman watching them from between the trees. Dean tried to reassure them, but admitted in writing that he too had seen movement. On the seventh day, the family reached what Dean called the Hollow Ridge. It was a steep outcropping surrounded by thick trees and low fog. From this point on, the journal entries became sporadic and fragmented. He wrote of a second trail that appeared and vanished depending on the time of day. He wrote of his own voice echoing back at him from places it should not have. Alice became withdrawn. She stopped speaking for long periods and began sketching the same symbol repeatedly in the dirt. A spiral inside a spiral. The boys spoke less and clung to each other constantly. They refused to sleep unless Alice was touching both of them. The final entry was a single sentence. It read, "We are not lost, but we are no longer alone." Beneath the sentence was a drawing. It was of the family standing in the woods. Behind them were tall figures with blank faces and long limbs stretching into the tree branches. Analysts compared the sketches to those found in the chamber unearthed during Ellis Crane's last expedition. The match was uncanny. It was as if the same hand had drawn both despite the time gap. Dean Reynolds' handwriting was also compared to the scribbles found on the map in the recovered tent. Investigators confirmed it was a match. Around the time the journal was being processed, 2 hikers reported something unusual. They had taken a restricted route around the base of the hollow ridge without realizing it was off-limits. Near a dry creek bed, they found a crude lean-to constructed from fallen logs and covered in moss. Inside were bones. Animal bones, mostly. But among them was a child's mitten with the letter L embroidered in red. They brought it to authorities. DNA tests confirmed it had belonged to Leo Reynolds. The mitten was in pristine condition. The thread had not faded. The fabric had not deteriorated. It was as if it had been preserved in a vacuum. That was the word used by the forensic team. Vacuum. The area was immediately sealed off. More detailed searches commenced with ground radar and heat mapping equipment. One thermal drone caught something anomalous. Deep within a grove, south of the ridge, a pulse of heat appeared for less than a second. It resembled a human form kneeling and then vanishing. Attempts to repeat the reading failed, but within that grove, searchers discovered a spiral carved into a stone slab that sat partially buried beneath the roots of an ancient tree. The stone was unlike others in the region. It appeared volcanic, but had no known match in the area's geological record. Interest reached the federal level. A joint team of geologists and anthropologists was brought in. They uncovered more carvings deeper in the soil. One depicted two small human figures with light radiating from their heads. Others showed distorted humanoid shapes entwined with branches and roots. One image showed a figure splitting into two halves, each walking in different directions. None of the carvings had modern equivalents. They were estimated to be centuries old, but the lines were crisp as if carved recently. Some of the moss on the slab was still growing over the edges of the lines. That suggested the symbols had been exposed to air only recently. That same week, a photograph was mailed to the ranger station with no return address. It showed two boys standing beside the spiral stone. Their faces were turned away, but the clothing and height matched Thomas and Leo Reynolds. The photo was taken in full daylight. Shadows confirmed the sun's position as early afternoon. The foliage in the image matched the current season. The photograph had been taken within the last month. Analysis confirmed the paper was standard retail Polaroid stock manufactured in the last 5 years. No prints were found on it. The envelope had been handled by someone wearing gloves. The photo was leaked. Within hours, social media erupted. News outlets ran the story globally. Experts and skeptics debated the authenticity. Some claimed it was a hoax staged by someone seeking attention. But the image analysis held. The Reynolds twins, if still alive, would now be in their late teens. Yet the boys in the image looked no older than 10. This discrepancy deepened the central mystery. Time in the forest did not appear to move in accordance with the outside world. That theory was once unthinkable. Now it became the most accepted explanation. The photo of the two boys beside the spiral stone forced authorities to take unprecedented action. A specialized recovery team was assembled consisting of search and rescue personnel, wilderness psychologists, and forensic scientists. Their mission was simple in concept but impossibly complex in execution. They would enter the forest through the Hollow Ridge sector and attempt to locate and retrieve the Reynolds twins if they were still alive. The assumption no longer centered on survival in the typical sense, but on containment within a temporal or spatial distortion. The team was led by Commander Avery March, who had served on remote recon operations in the Arctic. She studied every available map journal and photograph and committed every known anomaly to memory. Her second-in-command, Dr. Malcolm Lay, was a cognitive scientist who had studied psychological effects of sensory deprivation and time dilation in isolation environments. They entered the basin at sunrise. There were 7 team members. Each was equipped with a GPS unit, analog compass body camera, heat sensors, and a custom proximity alarm designed to emit a tone if it lost signal with the others. Every member wore a patch labeled Group A in red. A second group, Group B, would remain stationed at the base camp to monitor transmissions. The first 2 hours were uneventful. The air was dry and the sky clear. Birds chirped above the treetops and the occasional rabbit darted across the underbrush. Commander March reported via radio that they had passed the boundary tree marked with the spiral symbol. The terrain grew denser as expected, and the group maintained a steady pace. Around hour 3, things began to shift. Dr. Lay noticed the light quality had changed. The sun remained high, but the shadows no longer aligned with compass direction. Trees on the west side now cast shadows to the north. The GPS units began showing conflicting altitudes. One device read an elevation increase while another showed descent. The group paused to recalibrate. Commander March ordered them to switch to analog instruments and maintain a visual line. As they resumed movement and the underbrush thickened, the air grew heavier with a metallic scent. One member named Callahan reported nausea. He was instructed to hydrate and rest for 10 minutes. During that rest period, the team recorded ambient audio. The tape captured a low harmonic hum present beneath the natural forest sounds. It pulsed every 11 seconds. Dr. Lay noted the frequency matched certain infrasonic tones used in psychological studies to induce disorientation. An hour later, the group reached the edge of a clearing. In the center stood the spiral stone partially covered in moss. Proximity alarms remained silent. Cameras recorded continuously. The stone was identical to the one in the photograph. The team approached cautiously. No children were present. No footprints, no clothing. But someone had drawn figures in the soil beside the stone. 2 small stick figures holding hands. Beside them, a larger figure loomed with elongated arms and a crown-like shape on its head. Commander March ordered a perimeter check. The area was secured. No other signs of recent human activity. Suddenly, one alarm went off. The team member Fraser had stepped outside the communication radius. He had only moved 20 feet beyond a cluster of trees. He responded over radio that he was pursuing what he thought was movement. When the others reached his position, Fraser stood frozen. He claimed to have seen a child step into the clearing and then vanish. He described the child as barefoot, with light-colored hair wearing a white shirt. No physical evidence supported the sighting. Still, Commander March logged the report and requested all members remain within 10 feet of one another. The team set up camp for the night near the stone. Tents were arranged in a circular formation. Infrared motion sensors were placed at cardinal points. During the night, multiple triggers were recorded. Each time an alert sounded, team members investigated. No animals were spotted. No signs of intrusion. At 0347 hours, the team's audio log captured a soft melody faintly audible from the northeast. It lasted 23 seconds. Analysis later revealed it matched the lullaby previously recorded on recovered tapes. At 0500 hours, team member Martinez was missing. Her sleeping bag was empty. Her boots remained beside it. A search began immediately. Tracks were found leading into a dense fern grove. They ended abruptly at the base of a tree with spiraled bark. Martinez's body camera was discovered 6 feet up embedded in the bark. The footage ended with her turning toward a flicker of movement. The final frame showed a pale hand reaching into view. Her voice on the tape was calm. She said, "I think they want me to listen." Commander March ordered extraction. The team returned to base without further incident. Upon review of the footage and audio, one anomaly was discovered. Martinez's camera had recorded a moment when both Thomas and Leo Reynolds appeared briefly behind her tent. They did not speak. They simply stood side by side. Both looked younger than 10. Both had blank expressions. They vanished after 10 seconds. No one in the camp saw them directly. Only the camera caught the moment. News of the failed rescue and the disappearance of Martinez remained classified. Official statements described the mission as a weather delay and incomplete assessment. Internally, the agency began assembling a psychological profile of the forest zone. Dr. Lay drafted a report that suggested the environment operated as a selective consciousness filter. It responded to emotional states and possibly replicated or projected illusions based on the observer's mind. He warned future efforts must account for not just terrain but mental thresholds of each team member. Weeks later, another envelope arrived. Inside was a drawing made in pencil. It showed 2 children standing beside a woman. Her hair was long and her eyes empty. Behind them, trees bent inward, forming a circle. The drawing was signed with the initials LR. Handwriting analysis confirmed a match with Leo Reynolds' school assignments from 1986. The envelope contained no return information. The drawing was fresh. The paper was smooth and unaged. It had not yellowed or creased. A code on the back read 08.042.196. Park investigators identified the numbers as coordinates. They pointed to a narrow glen previously unmapped. The glen lay beyond Hollow Ridge near a canyon wall where rock slides often blocked satellite coverage. A drone was dispatched to scan the area. What it found was a depression in the earth surrounded by trees with white bark and no leaves. In the center of the glen was a stone circle, and inside it a small wooden structure with a red cloth tied to its roof. The drone circled once, and then its feed cut to black. The structure in the glen became the new focal point of the investigation. After the drone feed cut out, the agency dispatched a smaller ground team to verify what the footage had shown. This group was reduced to 4 members, all of whom had passed psychological evaluations and undergone training in sensory disorientation. They carried analog tools in addition to digital ones and followed a direct path guided by traditional compass bearings. The terrain leading to the glen was rough and overgrown. Several large boulders and dead trees blocked the trail, as if the forest had tried to reclaim the route overnight. Still, the team advanced and reached the glen within 5 hours. What they found confirmed the drone's brief footage. The trees surrounding the glen were entirely white, stripped of bark and leaves. Their limbs stretched upward like frozen hands. In the center of the clearing stood a circular stone formation about 2 feet high and 20 feet wide. Inside the circle was a wooden structure no larger than a child's playhouse. It was made from mismatched planks and had no windows. A strip of red cloth fluttered from the roof tied to a crooked branch. The team approached cautiously, recording everything. The air within the glen was colder than expected. A thermometer registered a drop of 15 degrees compared to the forest beyond the ridge. No wind passed through. No birds called. The silence pressed against the eardrums. Team member Jensen attempted to speak into the recorder, but her voice distorted as if underwater. The tape later revealed a low echo that repeated her words with a 2-second delay. This phenomenon was noted and tested again using another team member. The same effect occurred. Sound within the glen did not behave naturally. They entered the stone circle. The structure's wood was old but solid. No hinges were visible on the door, which was made from a single slab of pine. They used a crowbar to pry it open slowly. Inside was a dirt floor and a wooden crate. The walls were covered with carvings etched into the surface in looping patterns. Most were spirals. A few were small handprints. In the center of the back wall were 2 initials carved deeply, TR and LR. No other writing was visible. The crate was light and easily lifted. Inside were personal effects: a pair of small shoes, a weathered blanket, a toy soldier, a torn photograph of Alice Reynolds. Her face was partially burned away, but the outline of her blouse matched one from family photos taken in 1986. Beneath the objects lay a notebook with only 3 pages remaining. The first read in large, childish letters, "I remember the sun." The second page read, "We do not dream here." The third contained a single drawing. It showed 2 figures walking into a tree that had a door carved into its trunk. The team took photographs and carefully packaged each item. As they exited the structure, one member named Rivas paused and looked to the northeast. He said, "I see something moving." No other team member reported seeing anything. They scanned the direction and found no heat signatures. Still, Rivas insisted he had seen a figure. It had stood between the trees and watched without blinking. He described it as tall and thin, with eyes that reflected no light. The others dismissed it as strain or stress. They began the hike back to the ridge. On the way back, Rivas grew silent. He walked last in line and began to lag behind. When the group paused to wait for him, he rejoined without speaking. The return trip took longer than expected. By the time they reached base, night had fallen. One of the rangers commented that the sun had seemed to set too quickly. The official clock and their watches differed by over an hour. Data review later showed the camera recordings had also desynced. Footage from inside the glen showed time codes that reversed briefly and then resumed normally. That night, Rivas was placed under observation. He had refused to eat and spoke little. At 23:17 hours, he began drawing on the wall of the station's holding room using charcoal from the fireplace. He drew spiral after spiral, filling the entire panel. At 0042 hours, he collapsed. Medical personnel found no physical injuries. He was unresponsive but breathing. He was transported to the nearest hospital. Over the next 4 days, he remained in a catatonic state. Doctors found no cause. On the 5th day, he whispered a phrase before falling silent again. He said the trees took them because they were afraid. This sentence was repeated in later audio recordings from the holding room. On 3 separate nights, the same phrase was captured faintly, even though Rivas did not speak again. The agency declared a temporary moratorium on all physical expeditions into the glen. Instead, they analyzed the materials recovered from the structure. Forensic testing confirmed the shoes belonged to Leo Reynolds. The blanket contained strands of Thomas's hair. The photograph of Alice matched the emulsion type from 1987 Polaroid stock. The notebook paper matched paper brands sold in Portland stationery shops during that year. Nothing in the crate was younger than 12 years old. Yet all objects were preserved far beyond expected degradation rates. A linguistic team examined the carvings inside the structure. One pattern repeated 12 times in different areas. It resembled a tree with 2 roots and 1 eye in its trunk. Researchers noted similarities to ancient symbols found in cave systems across the Pacific Northwest, but no direct match was found. A cultural historian from the university identified the symbol in folklore as associated with the concept of borrowed time. Legends claimed certain places allowed time to fold upon itself, creating loops where memories became physical spaces. Those who entered such spaces might not age or might forget who they were entirely. At the same time, more reports came from nearby towns. Children began having dreams about white forests and boys with quiet voices. Parents described their children waking up crying and saying things like, "They are waiting," or "the door is open again." Most dismissed the dreams as coincidence, but one family came forward with a more disturbing account. Their 7-year-old son drew a map from memory showing the hollow ridge and a spiral stone. He had never been to the forest and had not seen any media related to the story. His map matched the official one kept by park authorities almost exactly. Psychological experts began to theorize that the forest was projecting across distances. The idea of spatial influence replaced older concepts of containment. The Reynolds mystery now pointed toward a broader phenomenon, one not limited to South Pines Basin. If the forest could affect minds from afar, then its reach had grown or had always been wider than believed. After the structure in the glen revealed its strange contents and the reach of the forest began affecting children outside its borders, the investigation took a new turn. A group of researchers from the University of Oregon proposed a psychological field study near the reserve's border. Their aim was to monitor local children for recurring dreams, memory disruptions, or shared imagery. The researchers were granted limited access and began interviewing families within a 30-mile radius of South Pines Basin. They expected scattered and inconclusive results, but within 2 weeks they had recorded over 30 separate incidents with striking similarities. The most consistent image was of 2 pale boys standing just beyond the window of a house at night. Each child described the boys as quiet, with eyes that did not blink and expressions that never changed. Some said the boys pressed their hands against the glass and mouthed words without sound. Others reported that the boys only watched and then turned away, disappearing into mist. The sightings were almost always preceded by dreams of forests white with fog. In several cases, the children had drawn the spiral symbol without prompting. One child, named Clara, drew a picture of a large cedar tree with a door in its trunk. Inside the door was a room filled with floating lights. She said the boys told her this was the place where they waited when it was not safe to be seen. Another child named Miguel spoke of a staircase inside the forest that led downward, even though there was no mountain. He described voices coming from the stairs, asking questions he could not understand. His parents said he had never been to the reserve and had no exposure to the story. The researchers compiled their findings and presented them to federal authorities. A special team known as the Cedar Archives was formed under a quiet branch of national oversight. Its purpose was to collect and preserve anomalous reports linked to geographic anomalies. South Pines Basin became Archive Site 47. The Cedar Archives conducted a cross-reference search across decades of missing persons reports. They found at least 9 disappearances within a 50-mile radius that matched patterns from the Reynolds case. Each involved families or young children. Each took place near dense woods or during periods of atmospheric disturbance such as storms or rapid fog formation. One case from 1954 involved a boy named Jonah Peck who vanished during a family picnic. His twin brother claimed Jonah had followed someone into the trees and never returned. When asked who he followed, the twin described a version of himself but with no mouth and hair that moved without wind. The files had been buried under unrelated cold cases until now. The Cedar Archives requested access to old park ranger logs and found several pages describing unexplained encounters in the 1970s. One ranger had noted strange lights hovering above Hollow Ridge during a patrol. Another wrote about an echo in the forest that repeated his thoughts before he spoke them. With this growing body of evidence, the Cedar Archives set up a semi-permanent observation post near the entrance to the basin. The post was disguised as a weather station and staffed by rotating agents. Their directive was to monitor environmental fluctuations and collect any physical anomalies. In the second week of operation, the station recorded an electromagnetic pulse that caused every clock to reset. The power flickered but held. Cameras pointed at the ridge captured what appeared to be a fog rolling uphill in reverse. The fog moved steadily against gravity and vanished at the summit. The footage was time-stamped and reviewed by independent analysts. No trickery was detected. On the third week, a young woman approached the station on foot. She was barefoot and carried a torn journal. Her clothes were faded but intact. She refused to give her name at first, but when shown a photograph of Alice Reynolds, she identified the woman as her mother. The agents brought her inside and contacted medical support. The woman claimed her name was Lily and said she had been with the boys for many years. Her statements were disjointed. She spoke in a slow, measured voice as if translating thoughts into words with great care. She said the forest was a veil that lifted only for those it accepted. She said the boys had grown in circles, not in lines. She said she had been their guide for some time, but they no longer needed her. When asked how she came to be in the forest, she said she walked in after hearing the melody and followed it past the normal path. She described a place where sound folded and light pulsed like breath. The agents recorded her statements and provided her with care. Genetic testing later confirmed she was not a Reynolds relative, but her DNA showed abnormalities in mitochondrial structure consistent with prolonged exposure to high radiation environments. No radiation was detected in or near the forest. Lily disappeared 2 nights after her arrival. Security footage showed her walking calmly into the woods at dawn. No one stopped her. The station alarms never triggered. Her journal was left behind. It contained dozens of sketches of the spiral tree, the stone circle, and the boys. One entry stood out. It read, "The boys sing in silence because the air is too loud for truth. They remember what the world forgot." One drawing showed a tall figure with hands that stretched into the earth like roots. Its face was a blank oval, and around it floated dozens of eyes. The Cedar Archives used the information to map areas of the basin that might correspond to locations Lily described. One such site was known from older maps as the Deep Hollow. It had been considered inaccessible due to unstable rock formations and dense overgrowth. A new team equipped with drones and seismic scanners began preparations to explore the hollow. Preliminary scans showed strange voids beneath the ground. These voids formed a pattern resembling concentric circles extending outward like ripples. No natural explanation was found. Meanwhile, more letters arrived at the ranger station. Each was written in blocky handwriting and postmarked from distant states. The letters contained descriptions of dreams and sightings that echoed those near the basin. One letter came from a woman in Idaho who said her daughter had drawn the spiral symbol after waking from a nightmare. The dream involved trees growing through a house and boys who asked if it was time to come home. The letters were archived, and the pattern grew. The Deep Hollow had always been marked as a dead zone on the old maps. Surveyors noted its unstable soil and dangerous crevices, and it had remained untouched for decades. After Lily's journal hinted at something buried beneath the surface, the Cedar Archives prioritized a ground investigation. A crew of 12 was deployed with seismic scanners and portable LiDAR systems. Their first scans revealed what they called the ring pattern. It consisted of multiple concentric voids extending outward beneath the hollow like ripples from a dropped stone. The voids were equidistant and varied in depth, suggesting an artificial formation. The team established a perimeter and began excavation at the most stable point. After 12 hours, they uncovered a stone cap. It was circular and etched with spirals similar to those found in the glen. The cap was removed with care. Beneath it lay a shaft of compact earth that descended at a perfect angle. The walls were smooth as if something had melted the stone rather than carved it. At 15 feet depth, the shaft opened into a chamber. Cameras were lowered first. The chamber was dry and contained a central platform surrounded by 6 pillars. Each pillar bore carvings of trees with eyes. Inside the chamber were objects. They appeared arranged rather than scattered. A child's jacket, a metal lunchbox, a photograph of Dean and Alice Reynolds seated at a picnic table, a paper airplane with Thomas written on the wing. These items had not degraded with time. The jacket still held its color. The lunchbox was free of rust. The photograph was clear and unwrinkled. It was as if the chamber had preserved them through something other than physical protection. One object drew special attention. It was a mirror set in a wooden frame placed upright against one pillar. The glass was cloudy but intact. When the camera focused on the mirror, something unexpected occurred. The feed glitched and for 3 seconds showed 2 boys standing in the chamber. They faced the mirror with their backs to the camera. No one else was visible. The boys did not move. When the glitch ended, the image returned to the empty chamber. Multiple playback devices confirmed the anomaly. Analysts could not replicate the effect. The chamber was declared an active anomaly site. The Cedar Archives authorized 2 members to descend and examine the items directly. They wore biometric suits equipped with constant vitals monitoring. As they entered the chamber, the air became noticeably warmer. Instruments recorded a rise in electromagnetic activity. One agent reached for the paper airplane and felt what he described as resistance in the air. Not a force, but a feeling that he should not touch it. He ignored the sensation and retrieved the object. At that moment, the lights dimmed, his heart rate spiked. He reported hearing a voice say, "Return us." The second agent confirmed hearing nothing. Both agents returned without physical harm, but the first reported recurring dreams for weeks. In each dream, he walked through a white forest where the trees whispered in his own voice. He said he never saw the boys again, but he always knew they were nearby. The items from the chamber were taken for analysis, all confirmed to belong to the Reynolds family. No fingerprints were found, no DNA beyond what had already been identified. The mirror was tested for material composition and found to contain traces of elements not typically used in commercial manufacturing. Some of the particles had properties similar to meteoric glass. The chamber itself remained stable. Additional scans revealed a second passage blocked by stone. It led deeper. The Cedar Archives debated whether to proceed. One archaeologist argued the formation resembled burial chambers found in certain pre-Columbian cultures, but no direct correlation existed. Another theory emerged, that the chamber was not meant for the living, but was instead a holding space for memory or time. Theories outpaced evidence, but all agreed the chamber had been constructed with intent. Around this time, another strange event occurred. A boy was found wandering along a rural road 20 miles from the basin. He was barefoot and silent. His clothes were handmade and his skin pale. Authorities brought him to a hospital where he refused to speak for 2 days. When shown photographs of the Reynolds twins, he pointed at Thomas. He then wrote the word brother on a notepad. Genetic testing was performed. The boy was a 97% match to Thomas Reynolds. But the age did not align. The boy appeared no older than 10. His features had not aged in over a decade. The boy was placed in protective custody. The Cedar Archives conducted interviews using child psychologists. The boy answered few questions, but he described a room with no doors and a song that never ended. He said time slept there. He said the forest carried thoughts like wind carries leaves. He said the others were still within, and that some no longer remembered they had families. He said we are what is kept. He drew a picture of the mirror and wrote beneath it, "They do not like reflections." In the following days, static interference affected multiple broadcasts in nearby towns. Radios cut to silence for minutes at a time. Televisions flickered and returned to programs that had not aired in years. One resident reported hearing the lullaby through her baby monitor despite no source of sound in the room. Surveillance footage from the hospital where the boy stayed showed moments where the lights flickered and shadows moved without any apparent source. The Cedar archives determined the boy's return signaled a breach in containment. If one had left, then others might follow or be pulled. They reinforced security near the deep hollow and increased atmospheric monitoring. A new layer of investigation began to focus on intention. What purpose did the forest serve? Why had it preserved the boys? Why now had one been released? The return of the boy identified as Thomas Reynolds cast new urgency over the entire investigation. While his presence offered a sliver of hope, it also brought deeper questions. Why had he returned unchanged? Why did he refuse to speak except in riddles? Why did electronic disturbances accompany his presence? These questions consumed the Cedar archives. They increased the frequency of their observations and reopened the secondary passage found in the chamber below the deep hollow. It took 4 days to clear the stone blockage. What lay beyond was not another chamber, but a narrow corridor that curved downward into darkness. The air within the passage was thick and warm. Lights flickered. Equipment struggled to maintain calibration. The corridor walls were smooth and lined with grooves that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. The grooves formed repeating patterns that resembled musical notation. At intervals along the corridor, the grooves formed what appeared to be scales, but the spacing and structure were not consistent with any known system. Dr. Malcolm Lay was brought back to advise. He believed the patterns were not music in the traditional sense, but representations of frequency. He theorized the grooves and coded tones meant to affect cognition and memory. At the end of the corridor, the team found a second mirror. It stood within a carved recess and reflected nothing. Even when lights were directed at it, the glass remained dark. The surface absorbed all illumination. A camera placed before it recorded only blackness. The mirror was framed in wood and etched with spiral motifs. Beneath it was a shallow depression filled with soil. Within the soil lay fragments of bone. Forensic analysis later revealed the bones belonged to an adult female between 30 and 40 years of age. The assumption was immediate. The remains might belong to Alice Reynolds. However, no official identification could be made. The bones showed no signs of trauma. They bore unusual mineralization along the marrow cavities. This mineralization matched deposits found only in the upper glen where the original structure was located. A connection was drawn. The mirrors that glade the glen and the deep hollow were not isolated phenomena. They were part of a network. A system built long ago for reasons unknown. The presence of human remains near the second mirror suggested that something had gone wrong. While the second mirror showed nothing physically, its presence had effects. Audio equipment placed nearby recorded low rhythmic pulses. Each pulse lasted 5 seconds and repeated at 30-second intervals. Researchers exposed to the pulses reported vivid dreams. These dreams followed a pattern. A dark forest, a tall figure with branching arms, a song carried on the wind. Some dreamed of sinking into the ground and watching memories flow past like rivers. Dr. Lay recorded his own experience. He said he dreamed of Alice Reynolds standing beneath a tree with open arms. She spoke without sound and mouthed the words, "Not yet." The unaging Thomas was moved to a secure facility outside the basin. He continued to draw spirals and trees. When shown a photo of the second mirror, he refused to look. He turned the photo face down and wrote, "They do not leave through there." When asked where the others were, he wrote, "Beneath us." When asked why he had returned, he wrote, "It was not my turn." These cryptic answers led the archives to consider a rotational cycle. Perhaps the forest released individuals in sequence, or according to specific events. If so, then more might come. Or none ever again. Further tests on the corridor grooves revealed a strange acoustic property. When certain frequencies were played nearby, the grooves vibrated. Not audibly, but with measurable resonance. A sound engineer created a composite tone based on these patterns. When played near the mirror, the glass surface shimmered briefly. A shape appeared for less than a second. Analysts later froze the footage. The shape resembled Leo Reynolds. He stood with his hand against the glass looking outward. His mouth was open as if mid-word. Then the image vanished and the mirror returned to black. This brief glimpse pushed the team to play additional tones. Each sequence produced variations. One showed two figures standing beside what looked like a doorway. Another showed the spiral tree glowing at its roots. The final sequence caused the lights to blow out and one camera to overheat. From that point, the archives halted all mirror experiments. The risk of destabilizing whatever system existed within the forest became too great. Meanwhile, sightings outside the basin increased. More children reported dreams of singing trees and mirrors buried beneath hills. In one instance, a teacher in southern Washington reported that 7 of her students had drawn identical images of a tree with a spiral in its bark and 2 children standing beside it. None of the children knew each other outside of school. The drawings were collected and sent to the archives. Handwriting experts confirmed several of the phrases matched known samples from the Reynolds case. One note said they remember everything when it rains. Another read the song is quiet now, but not gone. A storm moved through the region shortly after. During the heaviest rainfall, a third mirror was found. It had washed partially free from the bank of a seasonal stream. Hikers reported the discovery and authorities retrieved it before public exposure. This mirror was smaller, about the size of a bathroom vanity. Its surface was cracked and one corner chipped. Despite the damage, it too emitted rhythmic pulses, though irregular and distorted. The grooves around the frame were incomplete. This mirror was taken to an isolated lab for study. Within days, every clock in the lab began to lose time. Not fast, but slow. Minutes vanished silently each night. One technician claimed he saw his own reflection blink when he had not. Another reported seeing 2 versions of himself layered briefly in the glass. The mirror was sealed and removed from use. Yet its effect lingered. Those who worked near it developed what doctors called sensory lag, a delayed reaction between thought and speech, between observation and understanding. Most symptoms resolved over time. Some did not. Rain returned to South Pines Basin in sheets that soaked the ground and turned paths to rivers. The forest breathed with it. Fog clung to the trunks like memory made visible. The Cedar archives had gone silent to the public. No more statements. No more footage releases. The mirrors had been secured in separate facilities, each hundreds of miles apart. The second mirror had been sealed in reinforced casing and lowered into a vacuum chamber. The third mirror was entombed within a concrete vault on a naval base. But the forest did not forget. It hummed softly beneath the roots, and the air carried that sound across valleys and through window cracks into sleeping homes. Inside the observation center near Deep Hollow, Thomas Reynolds sat cross-legged on the floor. He no longer answered questions. He no longer drew. He stared at a patch of wall with such focus that staff members covered it with a canvas to ease their own discomfort. He did not respond to the change. He blinked less than once a minute. His pulse remained low. His breath slow. Medical scans showed a brainwave pattern inconsistent with any known age group. At times, he registered as if in deep sleep. At others, his readings suggested heightened activity, as though his mind operated in multiple directions at once. That morning, the rain fell heavier. Trees bowed beneath the weight. The air around the observation center thickened until the security cameras flickered. Inside the vault, holding the collected items from the Reynolds campsite, an alarm triggered. No intruder, no breach, just movement. The mirror from the chamber vibrated gently in its casing. Audio sensors captured a single word repeated 3 times. Come, come, come. The power failed for 11 seconds. When it returned, Thomas stood facing the entrance. His eyes were open wider than before, and his lips moved without sound. The door clicked open even though no access code had been entered. Thomas walked into the storm barefoot and calm. The staff did not stop him. Those who tried found themselves unable to move as if frozen from within. Rain did not touch his skin. His clothes did not soak. He moved with purpose. He reached the base of the hollow ridge and began to climb. The soil parted for his steps. Trees leaned away as he passed. The spiral tree near the glen tilted slightly and a groove opened at its base. Thomas stepped into it. The earth sealed behind him. A ripple passed through the ground. Inside the sealed chamber where the mirror once stood, a change occurred. The soil where the bones had rested crumbled inward, revealing a staircase. The staircase led deeper than ground scans had ever shown. It spiraled downward beyond rock and clay and into a space that was neither cave nor chamber. Those monitoring from above reported nothing. Their screens stayed black. But one researcher dreamed that night of Thomas standing in front of the second mirror once again. In the dream, Thomas placed his hand on the glass and said it ends where it always begins. Within the forest, 3 figures emerged hours later. They stood together at the edge of a clearing where the grass grew in circular patches. One figure was taller and held the hands of 2 smaller ones. All 3 looked outward, as if seeing the world for the first time. Surveillance caught only partial images. Faces obscured by light, bodies blurred at the edges as if reality had not finished forming around them. The figures walked until they reached the old ranger road. A truck passed and stopped. The driver called authorities. By the time responders arrived, the 3 had sat quietly on the roadside. Alice Reynolds was identified by dental records. She had aged only slightly. Her skin bore marks of weather and strain, but her eyes were clear. She held both boys close. Thomas and Leo Reynolds showed no change from the last photographs taken in 1987. They spoke only once. A doctor asked them where they had been. Leo answered slowly. He said, "We were kept in the memory between trees. We were not lost, we were remembered." After that, neither boy spoke again. The family was moved to a rehabilitation center under round-the-clock care. Alice often stared at the window for hours. When asked what she remembered, she said not everything and not nothing. She said the forest was not a place but a process. She said the forest kept what the world forgot. Sometimes love, sometimes sorrow, sometimes both. She said the song never ended, but sometimes the melody changed. She drew pictures for the staff, trees with hands, faces in the roots, mirrors cracked down the center, a girl with eyes closed and a smile that did not fade. Across the country, children who had once dreamed of the pale boys began drawing other things. Sunlight, open doors, playgrounds without shadows. The spiral symbols stopped appearing. No more songs from the baby monitors. No more reversed fog. Researchers noted the decline in incidents. The Cedar Archives closed its field operations. The glen grew quiet. The mirrors showed no further images. Their pulses slowed and then ceased. Inside the forest, moss grew over the last stone circle. Birds returned to nests. Insects resumed their paths. Time softened at the edges. Years passed. The Reynolds family disappeared from public view. Some believed they had never truly returned. Others said they lived in a small town under new names. Those who visited South Pines Basin in the years that followed found nothing unusual. No strange carvings, no odd lights. But sometimes a traveler would pause by the base of a large cedar and feel something familiar. A hum in the air, a warmth in the soil, a memory rising like mist from the ground. A final document was added to the Cedar Archives before the site was officially decommissioned. It contained a note found in Alice's room, written in faded ink on the back of a photograph. It read, "The forest does not take without giving. It remembers those who forget themselves. We were not stolen. We were held until we could return, not for answers, but for each other." If you enjoyed this story and want more mysteries like it, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for future episodes. We would love to hear your thoughts on the plot in the comments below. Tell us what you think really happened and where in the world you are watching from.